like to start?
Go ahead.
Okay, sir. So I'm going to present this case of diffuse thyrotoxicosis, and it will be followed by a session of discussion. So next. So I'm Dr. Mariam Jan. I'm a general surgical trainee in surgical C ward of KTH. Next. Ma'am, can you share this? Acha. So Mrs. Y is a 30-year-old married lady from intercity internal shower. She's an MPhil student and she presented to us through OPD complaining of next unintentional weight loss 8 months, neck swelling 6 months, heat intolerance for 6 months, increase in bowel habits 6 months, palpitations 4 months, irritability 4 months, and hand tremors 4 months. Next. So, according to the patient, she was all right 8 months back when she noticed that she was losing weight unintentionally as her clothes were getting loose. The weight loss progressed, and over 6 months, she recorded her drop from 50 kgs to 38 kgs. She also noticed that her appetite is increased and she is always hungry. Also, her friends pointed out that she seemed to be having some neck swelling. The swelling was in front of the neck and it was painless, and it slightly enlarged gradually over the last 6 months. She had no difficulty in swallowing, no change in voice, although she did feel fatigue from last 3 weeks, but she had no difficulty breathing. Patient is also having intolerance to heat from the last 6 months. She is always feeling the need to sit in a cool room. And in spite of this, she has excessive sweating. She noted a change in her bowel habits from past 6 months, which were increased in frequency and mostly had diarrhea. Patient also from the past 4 months, she is having, her family noticed that she feels irritated all the time and she has lost her concentration ability. She also complains of palpitations and hand tremors. So there is no significant past medical history, but the patient underwent appendectomy around 10 years back, and the post-op and per-op course, it was unremarkable. She takes Panadol and over-the-counter pain medication for on-off generalized body aches, has taken medication for diarrhea in the past, uses propranolol sometimes for palpitation. There is no known allergy. Next. Please change the slide.
Okay, you finished with the history?
No, sir. Please change
Okay,
this. So she's a married lady from the last 2 years, having a 1-year-old daughter, breastfed for initial 6 months only. She has difficulty sleeping and experiences fatigue on climbing a flight of stairs. Appetite is increased, bowel frequency is increased, and urination is normal. She's neither a smoker nor alcoholic nor any addiction. Next. Mother died of breast cancer 1 year back, and father had ischemic heart disease and diabetes and could not survive CABG surgery 2 years back. There was no known thyroid illness in the family. Her socioeconomically, she is good. Her husband is a businessman and deals in electronics. They live in their own house and don't have any financial issues. Next. The systemic review also revealed that she is nervous and irritable all the time, has insomnia, and the things to add are she has generalized body aches and hand tremors, and also complaining of dysmenorrhea and oligomenorrhea from the last 6 months. In spite of, she also had stopped breastfeeding her 1-year-old child 6 months back. Next. So I'll summarize my history as a 30-year-old married lady from interior city Peshawar presented with diffuse thyroid swelling with symptoms of thyrotoxicosis from 6 to 8 months, including significant weight loss of 12 kgs over 6 months in spite of increased appetite, heat intolerance, increased frequency of bowels, also complaining of palpitations, irritability, and hand tremors from 4 months. She is oligomenorrheic and is dysmenorrheic during the cycle. She stopped lactating her 1-year daughter 6 months ago. Her parents passed away over past 2 years, which adds to her psychological distress. So based on history, my differential diagnosis would be diffuse thyrotoxic goiter, Graves' disease, or diffuse colloid goiter.
Okay, interesting. Based on this much history, you have already concluded that this patient on top priority is a differential diagnosis. You're labeling her as a case of diffuse thyrotoxic goiter, or the Graves' disease, the same thing, I think so.
Yeah.
And you have sufficient material in your history that is pointing towards the first and most important diagnosis of Graves' disease. You did not mention where she's coming from. She's coming from, okay, she's coming from interior city, but you have to mention it that she does not belong to an endemic area. Number one, you rightly mentioned that there's no history of any medication or taking any medicine, but specifically you have to mention about any history of taking medicines which are goitrogenic in nature. Okay. And rest of the history is quite elaborative. It is summarized at the end, and all these features relating to her local thyroid enlargement, relating to her CVS, CNS, respiratory and GI tract, all features are mostly in favor of your diagnosis as a case of Graves' disease. Anybody else who wants to add to it?
Any questions or any queries?
Okay, anybody who is of this opinion, the history is deficient in some aspect? Okay, go ahead with the examination points.
Sir, how are we gonna say she's not from an endemic area? Like you have to mention some specific areas, or generally in history will say she is not from some endemic area.
Okay, in our part of the world, the endemic areas are labeled the ones which are hilly areas where our iodine deficiency is more common, and Peshawar doesn't come under category of that endemic area. So that's why we have already labeled that she is not from endemic area. She can have a sporadic case.
Right. Thank
you. Okay, so I'll start with the general physical examination. Patient was examined in a well-lit room after informed consent in the presence of a chaperone. On examination, she is a young lady with thin build. She was sitting comfortably but looking anxious, agitated, sweaty, with staring eyes and neck swelling. Her palms were warm and sweaty, having fine tremors. The shadow sign was positive. Nails were normal. Vitally, she had a tachycardic pulse, which was 120 beats per minute, but it was regular. The blood pressure, temperature, and respiratory rate was normal, within normal limits, and a tongue had tremors upon protrusion. Next. So the thyroid examination on inspection, I noted that there was a diffuse swelling in front of the neck, which was butterfly shaped between the anterior aspects of the sternocleidomastoid. It was 8 centimeters below the chin, and the lower extent was 1 centimeter above the suprasternal notch in the thyroid region. There was no scars visible, there was no scars or visible nodularities. It moved with swallowing a sip of water. The tongue protrusion I didn't do. Skin doesn't show any signs of inflammation, and the neck veins were non-distended. Next. So diffusely enlarged thyroid with, on palpation, it was a diffusely enlarged thyroid.
Okay, Maria, you rightly mentioned that she, on apparent look, she was a thin, slim lady with no apparent apprehension, tremors, sign of toxicity, or behavioral change. She was quite comfortably sitting and responding to your voice command quite normally, and she was well-oriented. That's what you mean?
Yes, sir. I didn't mention the well-oriented part, but she was well-oriented.
Right.
Okay, sir. Then on palpation, it was a diffusely enlarged thyroid with regular smooth to firm surface, which moves up and down with swallowing. The overlying skin had normal temperature and was non-tender. Skin is pinchable and the swelling is mobile and non-pulsatile. I could feel the lower border of the gland 1 centimeter above the suprasternal notch. Trachea was central. Palpation of both carotids was done separately and was found to be equal bilaterally. There was no cervical lymphadenopathy. I didn't do the percussion as well, as the lower limit was visible. And near superior pole of the gland, I auscultated and it demonstrated a bruit. The eye examination.
Okay, let me stop you here, Maria. You did the local thyroid examination in a posture that is important. In which posture the patient has to be examined?
The neck has to, should be examined from behind, and the neck should be slightly flexed.
First, the patient has to be made sit on a stool in the center of the room, so that you are able to move all around the patient, because some of the examination is done from front, other examination is done from back.
Yes.
And the patient is asked to slightly extend her neck so that the interior aspect of the neck is quite visible from all sides. And then on inspection, what were your findings?
On inspection, I noted the shape of the gland, the diffuse enlargement, and there were no scars or nodularities, and it moved with swallowing. And
you mean there was a swelling? There was a swelling in front of the neck, in the midline as well as in both anterior triangles, and the combined shape of the swelling was resembling the shape of the thyroid, and there was no overlying nodularity on the surface of that particular swelling. And what made you think that it's a thyroid, it's not something else on inspection?
So because it had it was in that area, and it moved with swallowing.
It moved with swallowing. So why a thyroid swelling should move with swallowing?
Because the thyroid is attached by the Berry's ligament to the cricoid cartilage, and the cricoid cartilage has that inferior constrictor muscle, and when we swallow, that muscle contracts, it pulls the Berry's ligament, and the thyroid moves with swallowing.
Excellent. The inferior constrictor is a part of the muscle of mastication, a muscle of deglutition, and it has got two parts, cricopharyngeus and thyropharyngeus. So these two muscles both of them are attached to the larynx, and and alternatively the thyroid is attached to the larynx because of the Berry's ligament, which attaches the posterior layer of the capsule of the thyroid to the larynx. So when these muscles contract, it will lead to upward and downward movements of the larynx, and in return, it will lead to movement of the thyroid also. So this is the anatomical reason for swallowing test. Did you go for the tongue protrusion test?
No, sir, I did not do that because it was in the midline swelling. It wasn't a characteristic thyroglossal cyst that I suspected.
Okay, you should have. If you do any clinical test, you should have logical and scientific reason for that. If you don't do anything, again, you should have a scientific reason for that. So the logical reason for not going for tongue protrusion test was that it was hugely enlarged, occupying both sides of the neck and the midline also. And it was adopting the shape of the thyroid. It was not a solitary nodule in the midline. So clinically, you were almost pretty sure it's not a thyroglossal cyst. So it was unnecessary to go for tongue protrusion test.
Yes.
Agreed. Then what examination, what else did you find on an inspection?
So other than that, there was negative findings. There wasn't any inflammatory signs, or the neck veins were fine.
Which sign?
No inflammatory signs. The neck veins were normal. The carotid, the overlying skin was normal.
There was no any evidence of previous surgical intervention. There was no prominent vein on top of the and there was no coexisting swelling in the posterior triangle in other area of the head and neck, and even on the scalp also.
Okay.
Right? And then you moved on towards the second part of your examination, that was palpation. So what did you do on palpation of the front of the neck?
So from the front, I checked.
The temperature was normal. There was no tenderness, and the trachea was central. So how did you feel for the trachea?
So with the help of 3 fingers, 2 fingers are stabilized on the sides of sternal notch, and with 1 finger I check that. Also, if the
Okay.
trachea is deviated, then there's a sign which is called trail sign, which is the prominence of sternocleidomastoid if it's deviated.
Right. So, I mean, you filled for the space. First, you palpated the trachea, and then you, on either side, you filled for the space in between the trachea and sternocleidomastoid muscle on each side. So the space was equal on either side. There was no increase or decrease of the space. So it's one point that was suggestive of central location of the trachea. So on palpation of this trachea, did you find that there was retrosternal extension or not?
No, sir. The lower limit of the gland was palpable, and I could not.
So if you can feel the trachea in the midline, it means that the thyroid is not extending downwards. Number one. And what are the conditions in which the trachea can be deviated to one other side?
Condition, it could be a huge multinodular goiter, or it could be due to compression from a carcinoma. Mostly the anaplastic
Inflammation, tumor, enlargement of thyroid, retrosternal extension, retrotracheal element of the thyroid. These are all conditions in which can lead to tracheal deviation to one or other side, number one. What is the difference between tracheal compression and retrosternal extension?
Tracheal compression can be without retrosternal extension as well. Retrosternal is when the thyroid extends below the sternal notch.
You rightly said that there's no obligation that every retrosternal extension will lead to thyroid tracheal compression, or every tracheal compression can be due to retrosternal extension. But retrosternal extension can lead to tracheal compression. That's one thing. So, what are the clinical tests you did for tracheal retrosternal extension?
So I did not do the the test. I only checked the trachea that was central, and the lower limit was palpable. So I omitted the other.
So what other clinical tests can be done for extension, substernal extension of the thyroid?
Other than this, that I can do the Pemberton sign, which is a sign in which the patient raises the arms to the level of sides of the face. And then we checked for 3 things, that is cyanosis, venous congestion, and plethora, and then stridor.
Inspiratory stridor, facial plethora, and prominence of the neck veins. So if one or more than one of these features are present, it is suggestive of retrosternal extension, because this maneuver of Pemberton sign will lead to narrowing of the thoracic inlet, and that in turn will lead to engorgement of the vein because of compression of the greater veins. Okay, what other clinical tests can be done?
We cannot get below the swelling, and also the trachea is not palpable. Then when we percuss, then it is dull. Percuss over the sternum, so it is dull. Normally it should be resident.
And even you can go for radiology. You get an X-ray done to look for retrosternal extension, number one. What are the reasons, what are the conditions in which there can be tracheal compression?
Tracheal compression can be due to enlarged multinodular, long-standing multinodular goiter, which leads to tracheomalacia or scabbard trachea, and also a cancer, a carcinoma of the thyroid, which has invaded and it has compressed, and there can be thyroiditis, renal thyroiditis, or retrosternal goiter.
Right, excellent. Just go ahead with the rest of the examination points.
Okay, sir. So moving on to
how did you feel? Sorry. How did you feel for the palpation of thyroid?
Palpation
was done. Can you mention the position of the patient as well as your position also?
I stood behind the patient, and the neck was slightly extended, and I palpated each lobe separately.
Okay. Before that, I must ask you, how do you go for the deglutition test? How do you perform it clinically speaking?
Clinically, we ask the patient to swallow a sip of water, or we
You
can
ask her to take a sip of water
swallow a
and
sip.
ask her to hold it and don't swallow till I ask you to do so.
Don't
Then
swallow.
ask the patient to slightly extend the neck and then ask her to swallow. Right? Because when she's taking the sip of water and she is swallowing at the same time, so you won't be able to see it going down. Okay. Then you stood behind the patient. What was the position of the neck and head of the patient?
The patient was sitting in the center of a room, and I was behind, and neck was slightly extended, and I felt.
Okay. And you stood behind the patients. You put both of your arms on either side, both of your hands on either side of the neck, so that both the thumbs should be resting on the occipital region of the patient, and the neck should be slightly. Okay, there's a question. The neck should be flexed or extended.
So I'm not sure about this. I think it's flex.
Okay, neck extension. Flexion occurs when the chin touches the sternum. It is flexion of the neck. And when the occiput touches the back of the neck, it is known as extension, right? So the neck should be slightly extended and the head should be kept straight. You should be standing behind the patient's neck. You put both of your thumbs on the occipital region of the patient so that both of the arms, both of the hands are resting on either side of the thyroid swelling. And then you palpate both lobes simultaneously, one by one on either side. So the side of the neck which you want to palpate, the head should be slightly tilted towards that side so that the sternocleidomastoid muscle on that side is relaxed and you are able to look for the lower and posterior limits of the swelling. Similarly, if you are going for the palpation of the other, so the head should be slightly tilted towards that side.
Yes.
And then the isthmus of the thyroid is palpated with the tips of the fingers. And during the palpation, you should also make sure and you ask the patient to swallow so that the lower limit, if it's not clinically palpable, maybe with swallowing, you're able to feel for the lower limit of the thyroid. So there's another clinical test you have to do. Okay. And similarly, there can be another test at the same point, which can be done for evidence of tracheal compression, which is known as Kocher's test. What's that?
Kocher's test is when we press on the lateral lobe of the thyroid, and because of the scapular trachea, it collapses long-standing multinodular cord, and we hear a stridor.
Excellent. So again, you have to go for the lymph node. You palpated the lymph nodes systematically.
Yes, sir.
So how do you palpate the neck lymph nodes?
So we start, there are different levels of the lymph nodes, 7 levels, out of which 5 are at least palpable. 1 is the submental, then 2 is the upper 1/3 of the internal jugular vein, and second is the third is the middle 1/3, and fourth is the lower 1/3 of the internal jugular vein. And then the fourth one, then the fifth one is the posterior triangle. Sixth is the anterior triangle, which includes the pre-laryngeal and paratracheal lymph nodes, and 7 is mediastinal.
Excellent. Okay, the Farah rightly says that you have to examine you have to palpate for the lymph nodes in the same position as you were already on the back of the patient, and this is known as up and down technique. Like the levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lymph nodes, they are palpated while you are staying behind the patient's neck. You rightly said submental, submandibular, and preauricular are the level 1. There are upper jugular, middle, lower jugular, and then there are posterior triangle and the delphic lymph nodes, different level of lymph nodes. Why is it significant to palpate systematically all of the lymph nodes in a patient like her?
This is because if the enlarged lymph node could point towards another pathology.
Okay.
Suspicious.
But we have already made our mind regarding her diagnosis that she is suffering from a Graves' disease or primary thyrotoxicosis. So
Yes.
why we are jumping towards another diagnosis of suppose malignancy? Is there any chance of malignancy in a pre-existing Graves' disease?
It's very rare for malignancy to occur in thyrotoxicosis. It's less than 10%. But if there is a cold nodule in a Graves' disease patient, then it could be.
Okay, the possibility of a malignant nodule in a Graves' disease is quite possible, number one. And
Autoimmune.
sometimes these papillary carcinomas can lead to hyperthyroidism or thyrotoxicosis. So both is possible. So it's not justified to overlook the lymph node enlargement and the possibility of malignancy. Although it's very rare, but still it can happen. So you have the lymph node palpation is justified, right? Then what uh, what does it signify if one of the lymph node in the posterior triangle is enlarged? A group of lymph nodes are enlarged.
In the posterior triangle. Sorry, sir, I don't know.
Okay, it's quite possible. That's known as lateral aberrant thyroid. Maybe the thyroid is not that enlarged, or there is no evidence of any malignancy in the primary pathology of thyroid. But you can palpate a lymph node. You can palpate a mass in the posterior triangle or any other part of the lymph nodes, and there turns out to be metastatic deposits from primary carcinoma of thyroid. So you palpated of lymph nodes and there were no lymphadenopathy in this particular patient, and that's right. What else did you see for?
So then then percussed and then auscultated.
Okay, before percussion auscultation, you were mentioning that you did palpate for the carotids on either sides, not simultaneously, one by one. True?
Yes, sir.
Okay, why is it important to palpate for the carotids? Because we are not dealing with a patient who has got a vascular anomaly.
Sir, can
once again, sometimes normally you can palpate and you can feel for the carotid at the level of the thyroid cartilage at the anterior part of sternocleidomastoid muscle, right? So this is a normal site of palpation for the carotid on either side. Sometimes due to hugely enlarged thyroid, the carotid can be pushed posteriorly and can be felt at the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Again, that's significant, and that signifies again a benign disease, but hugely enlarged thyroid can have can lead to displacement of the carotids. But sometimes on one or either or both sides you can have an absent carotid pulse, and that shows an advanced malignancy. The carotid sheath has been already infiltrated by a malignant tumor of the thyroid, and the absence of the carotid pulse is known as
Berry sign.
BERRY apostrophe S, Berry sign. Excellent. And then you went for the auscultation. Where do you normally auscultate for the thyroid, and what do you auscultate?
So we auscultate at the superior pole of the thyroid for the superior thyroid artery, and during that we ask the patient to hold his or her breath, and we hold our breath as well, so as to remember that we have asked him. And then we put the bell or of the stethoscope on the superior pole. And during this, we also might as well ask the patient to look to the other side, because that opens the supraomohyoid space and we hear it better.
Right. So the scientific reason for auscultation at the upper pole of the thyroid, number one, the superior thyroid artery is the major contributor towards the thyroid. It's more than 60% of blood supplies from superior thyroid artery, number one. And if there's a Graves' disease, so there can be increased blood supply through superior thyroid artery, and you can have a bruit auscultated at the upper pole. And number two, the superior thyroid artery is the superficial one as compared to inferior thyroid artery, which comes from behind. You cannot auscultate for it, number one. And you rightly said during auscultation for thyroid bruit, you ask the patient to look at the opposite side and to hold her breath. And you hold your own too, because, and simple reason is that the Thyroid bruit sounds should not be mimicked, and they should not be misunderstood with that of the respiratory movements. And at the end of the procedure, you have to ask the patient to take a breath. And you rightly, and you have a logical reason for not percussion on the manubrium sternum, upper sternum, because you could palpate the lower limit of thyroid, and you were of this opinion that there is no evidence of retrosternal extension even by Pemberton's test. So that's why you did not go for percussion. If at all you need to percuss for the thyroid at the sternum, how do you do that?
So we can do it directly on the sternum as well, because it's a bone.
Okay. All right. Excellent. What next?
So next, we'll move on to the eye examination. So the patient had protruded eyeballs, exophthalmos, and then I checked that by the Nafziger.
Sorry, did you mention about the general physical findings?
So that will be completed after this slide.
Okay. Okay. So it's okay.
Next, the remaining.
So the eye signs. What did you look for?
Yeah. So the patient had protruded eyeballs, exophthalmos, and because I checked that from behind by Nafziger method, and that showed little prominence beyond the superciliary arches of the eyeballs. There was infrequent blinking and stare. The lid was retracted slightly. Dalrymple sign was positive. Lid lag was positive, which is one Graffi sign, and absence of forehead wrinkling was noted. Positive Geoffroy sign. There was difficulty in convergence, that is, the Mobius sign was positive. Eye movements were fine without any complaints of diplopia. She had visual acuity of 6/6, and the conjunctiva and cornea was normal.
Okay, so fortunately you had a lot of features in this patient, the ocular manifestations of thyrotoxicosis. And they were like the patient had an exophthalmos you observed while you were looking from the back of the patient. She had infrequent blinking of the eye and stare. The lid retraction was there. Leg was also there. She had loss of wrinkles on the forehead while she was asked to look at the ceiling without tilting her head upwards. And again, there was some element of the Mobius sign, that is loss difficulty in convergence. But the rest of the movements of the intrinsic muscle of the eye were fine, and there was no element of diplopia, and there was no conjunctival haziness and ulcerations and other complications associated with the exophthalmos. Nice, very good. Okay, just tell me why in a patient with the primary thyrotoxicosis, the eye signs are so prominent, and why? What are the logical reason behind?
The eye signs, they are prominent because...
Like why there should be exophthalmos? Why the eyeball should be more prominent on one or both sides?
Exophthalmos is basically because one is that the lid is retracted backward because of the overactivity of the involuntary smooth muscles, the Mueller muscles. And the other thing is that the eyelids, from behind, there is retroorbital fat and edema and cellular infiltration as well. So
exophthalmos is basically the eyeball is pushed forward and it's made more prominent because of the erythrobulbar collection of fat, fluid, and edema, number one. And there would be lid retraction and lid lag. Why that happens?
So the lid retraction is because of the overactivity of this tarsal smooth muscles, the Mueller muscles.
There is, we know this fact that the T3 and T4, it increases the adrenergic activity of the smooth muscles. So there is a the sympathetic supply to the levator palpebrae superioris muscle through the superior sympathetic cervical ganglion, and that leads to over contraction of the muscle, leading to over contraction of the upper eyelid, and it lags behind. It does not follow the movements of the eyeball. So this is known as lid lag and lid retraction. And why there should be loss of wrinkles formation on the forehead, again due to same reason. the overactivity and overcontraction of the smooth muscles in the forehead muscles. Mobius sign again because of the ophthalmoplegia, and the rest of the signs are all because of the overactivity of sympathetic fibers, as well as is also well said about that there is autoantibodies formation against the intrinsic muscles of the eyeball, so that could lead to ophthalmoplegia. So as we already know that the basic pathology behind the Graves' disease is there's autoantibodies formation. We'll discuss that later on. And there is also antibodies formation against the smooth muscles. Okay, so brightly justified. Next.
Next. So now I'm completing the general physical. I was going in that sequence. Patient could get up from a chair, negative Plummer's sign, and it means that there was no proximal myopathy. There was no signs of pretibial myxedema, and biceps and ankle reflex were normal.
Okay, right. We will discuss that, but basically this Graves' disease on one side, it can lead to thyrotoxicosis because of hyperthyroidism. And on the other side, it can lead to myopathy, ophthalmopathy, and neuropathy also. So because of this myopathy, the patient can have proximal muscle weakness leading to certain complications, and especially the patient is unable to stand from the chair or from squatting position, and that is known as Plummer's sign, right? And similarly, you elicited the muscle reflexes, and especially the biceps muscle. So in case of hyperthyroidism, what will happen?
It will be exaggerated.
Exaggerated muscle reflex, especially by biceps tendon muscle reflex. So that was not there in this case. And one of the complication of this thyrotoxicosis is pretibial myxedema. Basically, it is a dermopathy. It's a misnomer in which there is brawny edema of the skin, especially in the pretibial region. So that can lead to coarse hair from and some edema of the skin. It was not there in this case. So basically, she didn't have any evidence of Plummer's sign, any evidence of the increased muscle reflex, as well as any evidence of pretibial myxedema. But she had very prominent eye signs regarding the ophthalmopathy. What next?
So then the systemic examination, that was basically unremarkable. Apart from the lean built and scaphoid abdomen, she had an appendectomy scar in the RIF.
Right.
Next.
So the rest of the system examination was unremarkable. There was no positive finding found, especially in this patient. So there's no need to mention it.
Okay, so then I summarize the case. I have already summarized the history, so I'll go just summarize the examination findings, if that's okay.
Okay, right, fair.
So patient is a 30-year-old lady who is known history of thyrotoxicosis and a neck swelling. On examination, the patient is a young lady with thin build with obvious signs of thyrotoxicosis, including tachycardia but irregular pulse, sweating, tremors of hand and tongue. She has thyroid ophthalmopathy in the form of infrequent blinking, exophthalmos, lid lag, lid retraction, slight prominence of the eyeballs, and difficulty converging the eyes. Rest of the eye movements, visual acuity, and the conjunctiva was normal bilaterally. The neck is in the region. The neck swelling is in the region of the thyroid. It's diffuse, non-tender, smooth to firm in consistency. Moves with swallowing without any vitreous-sternal extension. There is no lymphovascular invasion, no lymphovascular abnormality noted, and a bruise is heard at the upper pole of the thyroid. There are no signs of proximal myopathy. The reflexes are normal. The rest of the systemic examination is unremarkable. Next.
Excellent presentation, Maria. Can we switch on to another candidate and another person amongst the senior most PGs for rest of the discussion?
So the last slide.
Who can take over? And meanwhile, if any of the rest of the participants, they want to answer, or if they want to ask questions, they are most welcome. They should unmute themselves and they can participate by hand raising or any tool they want to use.
So can I just finish off with the clinical diagnosis?
Sure.
So the clinical diagnosis is of a 30-year-old lady from Peshawar, which is a non-endemic area with diffuse thyroid swelling with hyperthyroid symptoms and mild thyroid ophthalmopathy. So most probably it's Graves' disease. Thank you. Next.
You are most welcome. Excellent presentation.
Can we please name?
Sorry?
Sir, can we please repeat the names of the examinations, all the examinations of lines, so that we could
What kind of examinations you want?
सर ये अभी सारे जो ट्रेकिया डेविएशन ये जो एक्सरे करते हैं सबस्टेंस एक्सरे डिग्रेडेशन टेस्ट हो गए कंबर्टर साइंस हो गए सर ये फोर्स टेस्ट आपने कहा था सर if we could repeat just the name of them so that we could say कि ये करने हैं तो फिर उसको जरा ज्यादा फोकस करो.
Okay, Pemberton sign is basically a clinical sign to elicit the presence of tracheal compression. In this case, the patient is asked to raise both of his arms so that both of the upper arms should touch the ears, right? And they should be raised above the head level. During this act of the patient, three things are to be looked for. Number one, facial plethora. Number two, engorgement of neck veins. And number three, inspiratory stridor. If one or more than one of these features are present, it is suggestive of tracheal compression, because by adopting such posture of the patient, the thoracic inlet space is decreased, which can lead to further compression on the structures, and there will be compression of the major neck veins, leading to facial plethora, as well as a compression on the trachea, leading to inspiratory stridor and engorgement of neck veins. So this is known as Pemberton sign, right?
For how much time the patient should raise the hands?
Sorry?
For how much time?
Okay,
कितने time?
it's important. Excellent question. The patient is asked to hold it in such a position for 5 minutes.
Right, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, next question. What's this question from the chat? In long case, you must examine, would know the negative findings, obviously.
Sir, Dr. Shahid is asking that should eye signs be checked in every thyroid examination or not?
Okay, in long case, you have to examine everything related to thyroid. Like the patient, first you have to inquire about the history in detail in each and every aspect of that, and then examination should be done in every aspect, right? Because you are left with half an hour time, and during this half an hour, you are supposed to take the detailed history of the patient as well as examine the patient. So if you are examining the thyroid, obviously you have to examine the related systems also, like ophthalmic examination, systemic examination. Maybe the patient is euthyroid, or if it's hyper or it's hypo. So in all cases, you can have findings in systemic examination as well as in eye examination, right? So an examination is not always essential that this patient is hypothyroid. You can have, Maria has mentioned about that the patient had no evidence of hypothyroidism also. And you can have certain features which are suggestive of hypothyroidism. And one of the examination point, which is pathognomonic of hypothyroidism, is delayed relaxation phase of the ankle jerk. In hyperthyroidism, it's important to look for the biceps tendon reflex, which is exaggerated. In hypothyroidism, it is the ankle jerk, which is important. And in hypothyroidism, there's delayed relaxation phase of the ankle jerk. That's important. Pre-tibial myxedema is not pathognomonic, but it can happen in the primary thyroid toxicosis as well as sometimes in secondary and tertiary hyperthyroidism. We will discuss that later on. You can also look for the features of hypothyroidism in the skin. The patient can have coarse, dry skin. The tongue has to be examined for evidence of hypothyroidism. In case of hypothyroidism, the patient can have increased pulse rate with bounding pulse, although with regular pattern. But in hypothyroidism, there can be bradycardia and there can be decreased pulse rate as well as the volume can be low. In hyperthyroidism, the patient can have increased pulse pressure. Systolic blood pressure is a bit raised and the diastolic is a bit low. So there's increased pulse pressure. In male patient, you should look for the evidence of gynecomastia on one side or both sides of it. Happens in case of thyrotoxicosis. So these all of the points which have to be examined, and the tremors are to be looked for. Tremors in majority of the time in two places: hand tremors and tongue tremors. And these tremors are usually fine. What type of tremors they are? Fine or coarse? Sorry?
Fine tremors.
Fine tremors.
Fine tremors. Any other question?
Sir, can we have the question answer session in another link? Because this link is closing now.
This link is okay. So how much time we are left with?
We can have a 40-minute another session on question and answers.
No, I mean in this one.
Almost over.
But there was a message which was suggested of unlimited time. What's that?
Yes, sir, there was.
I think there's something unlimited time. Let's see what happens, right? Okay, so anybody who can tell me that you, during examination, you were able to find that this patient had an enlarged thyroid. And enlargement of thyroid is known as
Goiter.
Goiters.
goiter. So number one, if anybody who's found to have a goiter, you have to establish three different types of diagnoses. Number one, the anatomical diagnosis, whether the goiter is involving the right lobe of thyroid, left lobe, both of the lobes, isthmus, upper pole, lower pole, or whatever area. So this is known as anatomical diagnosis. On the other hand, you have to establish a pathological diagnosis, whether we are dealing with a multinodular goiter, we are dealing with a diffuse goiter, solid thyroid nodule, or a malignant one. And third one, you have to establish the functional diagnosis, whether the patient is having hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, or the patient is euthyroid. So all these features, they can be detected from your history and clinical examination most of the time. And then your additional information drawn from the investigations, they are of help towards the diagnosis. So my question is that whether normal thyroid can be palpated or not.
Yes, sir. In a few cases, I believe in youth, it's euthyroid, but it's enlarged, diffusely enlarged.
Irrespective of the functional status of thyroid,
a
person like you and me, whether thyroid is normally palpable in a normal person or not.
In a very lean individual, I believe that is palpable.
Yeah, and very, especially in female gender and very thin, lean person, otherwise it's not palpable. So majority of the cases is not palpable. And can you grade different types of goiters?
There are three grades basically. 0 is when it's just palpable,
No,
but it's not
when
visible.
it's not palpable. 1 is when it's
Yes.
palpable but not visible, and 2 is when it's
Yes.
visible and palpable.
Right. So when the thyroid is palpable, it's neither palpable nor visible, but it's enlarged, it's grade 1. When you can't see it on inspection, but you can palpate it, this is 2, and 3 is when it's visible and palpable also. Okay. What are the signs of malignancy in a thyroid? Hello?
Can be fixed. It won't move on deglutition, and they can be enlarged lymph nodes. Cervical lymphadenopathy can be present. It can be rapidly enlarging. The history can be of short duration, hard inconsistency rather than being firm. And they can be presence of Berry sign, absence of the carotid pulse. There can be hoarseness, and Horner syndrome can also be present depending upon the extension, extrathyroidal extension, and they can be stridor due to tracheal obstruction.
All right, excellent answer. Like when we were talking about the history of this particular patient, this history was not much more than the 6 months time, right? So majority of the thyrotoxicosis patients, especially due to Graves' disease, the history is not that much longer. Because as we will be discussing secondary, tertiary thyrotoxicosis, the history is quite much longer than that. But in case of malignancy, the history is even shorter than this one. The patient has got a very history of few weeks to months. And along with that, the patient is complaining of compression signs, symptoms of compression, like shortness of breath, especially when the patient is lying down, cough, and it happens because of the irritation of the trachea. There can be difficulty in swallowing and deglutition. There can be a hoarseness of voice if the recurrent laryngeal on one side, both sides are involved. And there can be other signs and symptoms of metastasis, like as we mentioned, masses on either side of the neck, masses elsewhere in the body, especially on the scalp and other regions from metastasis. Okay, what's the difference between thyrotoxicosis and hyperthyroidism?
Sir, I'm Dr. Bushra. Thyrotoxicosis is the clinical manifestation of hyperthyroidism.
Okay, right. The thyrotoxicosis is a clinical manifestations of hyperfunction. I mean, there's excessive thyroid secretion leading to systemic manifestations of increase in thyroid hormone levels. And hyperthyroidism, when there is excessive secretion of the thyroid hormone from the thyroid, it may or may not lead to thyrotoxicosis. But the thyrotoxicosis, the excessive hormones can be achieved not only from thyroid, can come from somewhere else also. So this is the main difference. One is just excessive secretion of thyroid in hyperthyroidism, and thyrotoxicosis, the systemic manifestations of excessive secretion of T3, T4, either from primary sources of thyroid or from some other sources. Okay, what are the other sources of thyroid hormone other than thyroid gland? Hello?
Sir, it can be due to metastasis, ectopic thyroid tissue, or it can be due to struma ovariae, which is a tumor in the ovary, or embryonal carcinoma in the testes.
Yes. So there can be extrathyroidal origin of the thyroid hormones, which can lead to excessive production, leading to thyrotoxicosis, although the primary thyroid is not the main source of thyroid hormone secretions. And Walid, Mahmood, okay. Right answer from ovary is this can be a source. What's Graves' disease?
Graves' disease is thyrotoxicosis caused by diffuse enlargement of the thyroid gland, causing diffuse goiter, and it can have autoimmune manifestations like ophthalmopathy, dermopathy, and myopathy.
Okay, So it's an autoimmune disease in which there is excessive secretions of the thyroid hormones from the primary source of thyroid, and it occurs as a result of the antibodies formation against the thyroid stimulating antibodies.
Yeah,
What's that?
thyroid stimulating.
TSH receptors, sir, against
Okay.
TSH receptors.
Yes. So basically, these TSH receptors overactivity happens. As a result, there is excessive secretion of thyroid hormones. That's right or wrong?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The feedback mechanism is stopped because the TSH and TRH are not released from the pituitary hypothalamus, and the TSH is stimulated directly by the antibodies, so
Right.
which results in the
So
production of the
there's nothing like
hormones.
negative feedback mechanism.
Yes,
There's
sir.
nothing like negative feedback mechanism, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As
In
a
this
result of
case,
this,
yes.
there can be excessive production of hormones leading to
Graves'
thyrotoxic
disease.
state. So then what's primary thyrotoxicosis, what is secondary, and what is tertiary thyrotoxicosis?
Primary is when there's diffuse uptake, uniformly diffuse uptake. Secondary when they're heterogeneously uptaking nodules in the thyroid. And
Right, you're talking of the thyroid skin, but basically what is the source of this thyroid hormone, excessive
when the
thyroid hormone
normality is
secretions?
in the thyroid gland, it's primary. When it's in the pituitary, it's secondary. And when it's in the hypothalamus, it's tertiary.
Okay, right. When excessive thyroid hormone secretion happens as a result of the Graves' disease, primary thyrotoxicosis, and secondary, when there is a long-standing multinodular goiter as a result of, and some of the tissue of that multinodular goiter leads to excessive secretion of thyroid hormone, that is secondary, and when there is an autonomous thyroid adenoma, that is known as tertiary thyrotoxicosis. And you can have different findings because in primary thyrotoxicosis, usually the eye signs are more prominent as compared to cardiac and other CNS signs and symptoms. And secondary and tertiary, usually the severe symptoms and signs are more pronounced as compared to ophthalmic signs and symptoms. Right? So now, how do you investigate such a patient like this one? Hello?
Please.
Make sure that your all connections are properly working and the sound system is quite good.
Thyroid function test to begin with.
Sorry?
Thyroid function test.
Yes?
TSH,
Okay.
T4,
The command should be listened to properly, and the command can be like, how do you investigate such a patient? It comes like it includes all of the investigations. But if the command is like that, how you will confirm your diagnosis and what investigations are done for that reason? So then you have to be confined to the specific investigations which are suggestive of the diagnosis. So thyroid function test is number one.
Then ultrasound neck.
Right.
After that, thyroid scan.
Thyroid scan, yes.
And then for
what else?
retrosternal
Antibodies, sir.
extension, and then for retrosternal extension,
Antithyroglobulin antibodies.
AP and lateral X-ray neck, as well as thoracic inlet X-ray, soft tissue X-ray.
Okay, okay, that's true, but these X-rays are done not for diagnosing the disease. They are done as a preparatory process for the ultimate treatment of the disease. So let's concentrate on the diagnostic investigations. You rightly said the TFTs are the most important, essential part of the diagnosis. And then thyroids, ultrasound, thyroid scan, antithyroid globulin antibodies, and maybe FNAC is of some help. So what will be the picture in this case of TFTs? What do you mean by TFTs, and what are the different aspects of these investigations?
Patient has a clinical picture of thyrotoxicosis, so the TSH will be below normal limit and T3 and T4 will be high.
Yes. What is normal T3, normal T4, and normal TSH level?
The normal T3 is 3.5 to 7.5 micromole per liter. Then T4 is
Yes.
10 to 30 nanomole per liter, and TSH is 0.3 to 3.3 milliunits per liter.
Right.
The
So
milli and
any picture in primary thyrotoxicosis or Graves' disease, you can have raised level of T3, you can have raised level of T4, and suppressed level of TSH. So that is the typical picture of primary thyrotoxicosis. And why you would go for ultrasound neck?
Subclinical nodules.
So because
Okay,
not
number one.
all lesions are palpable, there can be few sub-centimetric nodules present in the thyroid which we cannot palpate, and those can be picked up by the ultrasound,
Right.
which can change
Number
the
one.
diagnosis from Graves' disease to having secondary thyrotoxicosis.
Multinodular goiter.
Yeah.
Yes. What else?
And if there is any suspicion of malignancy, which is not in this case, but it can take also that, and we can take help from color Doppler, and we can get to know about the vascularity of the gland, and any presence of cervical lymph nodes can also be detected by ultrasound if they are not palpable.
Okay, there's one comment from one of the participants that it should not be done in case of thyrotoxicosis because it's increased vascularity. I would object this because ultrasound neck is something non-invasive, it's non-hazardous to the patient, it has to be done, and it can help you to, although it's not of great help as far as clinical, you have made a clinical diagnosis. So like it can help you, as you rightly mentioned that there can be subclinical nodules in the thyroid. And some of the nodules can be malignant also, number one. You can detect the presence of lymphadenopathy in the neck and other region. And if the nodules are there, they can be picked up with a cystic or solid. So, and sometimes you go for the FNAC that we'll discuss later on. And FNAC can rightly be done. You cannot take an FNAC from a diffusely enlarged goiter, but if you detect the presence of a nodule, so you can take an FNAC from that nodule with the help of ultrasonography. So ultrasonography is not something which should be condemned. Okay. So it can help you to some extent. And then you rightly mentioned you should go for the scans, radioisotope scan. So can you tell me about what different types of isotope scans are there, what materials are used for that purpose, and what are the contraindications of scans, and what are the hazards associated with the scan?
Radioactive iodine scans can be diagnostic as well as therapeutic. In diagnostic, we use low dose.
Right now, we are concentrating on the diagnosis only.
In diagnostic tests, we use low dose iodine 123.
Yes.
But the problem is it cannot detect nodules which are small in size than a centimeter. For smaller lesions, we can use a technetium 99 scan.
Did not pick your point.
We can use radioactive iodine 123 as well as technetium 99. In 123 iodine, we cannot pick sub-centimeter nodules, but in technetium 99, we can.
Okay, if you concentrate on thyroid scans done for diagnostic purpose, most commonly what material is used in our part of the world?
Technetium.
Do you use iodine 123, 131 or technetium?
Technetium.
Technetium. Number one, it is cheaper. Number two, it's quickly done. Number three, it's it has no hazards,
half-life is
no
less.
complication at all, right? The only drawback associated with technetium scan is that technician is taken up quite quickly and quite largely by malignant nodules, malignant cells. So it means a hot nodule detected on technician skin means it is malignant, right? Otherwise, if you go for the other scan, radioactive scan done by iodine 131, 123, so cold nodule means malignant, hot nodule means benign. But in case of technician scan, hot nodules are suggestive of malignancy. And that's why this is known as discordant scan. Cold nodule on iodine scan and hot nodule on technician scan suggestive of malignancy is known as discordant scan, right? Excellent. So majority of the times we are using technetium for this purpose as a diagnostic tool. And okay, right, go ahead. So what are the complications of this scan? Sorry? Tea break?
No, sir.
Are you asking about the complications or the contraindications?
Yes, contraindications of the
The
Pregnancy,
contraindications
first of all.
would be,
Pregnant lady, lactating mother, children less than 5 years of age.
yes.
We
Why should you
cannot,
contraindicate in that?
in pregnancy, we cannot do the
And so patients who are themselves not refusing radioactive iodine.
We are not discussing radioactive iodine. We are discussing technetium scan as a diagnostic tool for detection of Graves' disease. Sorry?
It can increase ophthalmopathy, sir. No,
Sorry?
no, that was, sorry, sir. Wrong answer, sir.
Acha. So I don't think there's any contraindication for this iodine, this technetium scan is a diagnostic tool that can be done. And like the indications for scan is that any toxicity with nodularity. As such, if there's no nodule, so there's no need to go for the thyroid scan. But on one side, as we said, that there can be a malignant nodule in a Graves' disease. Number two, there can be autonomous nodule, which is toxic in the Graves' disease. And it's the only way in which we can differentiate between the primary, secondary, and tertiary toxicosis. So this is the benefit of the thyroid scan. What's the role of FNSC in diagnosing the Graves' disease? Sorry?
So we do
Basically, it is not used
FNSC for suspicious nodule, not Graves.
Yes. Again, we did mention that there can be nodule in the Graves' disease, which is malignant. There can be nodule in the Graves' disease, which is toxic and autonomous. So that can be detected with the help of FNSC. So FNSC, if there is suspicion of some nodularity in that, so again, that makes indication for FNSC, but not every case of diffusely enlarged thyroid. Okay, so there's anything else you want to discuss about the investigative tool? Sorry? और कोई इन्वेस्टिगेशन में कोई चीज ऐसी है?
सर एंटीबॉडीज के बारे में अगर थोड़ा सा तफसीलन हमें बता दें सर, जो एंटीबॉडी टेस्ट हम कराते हैं सर, वो किस टाइम हमें कराना चाहिए? ग्रेव्स डिजीज में लाजमी कराना है, उनका कोई फायदा है कि नहीं है सर, आगे जब जाके हम उनकी ट्रीटमेंट वगैरह करते हैं उसमें?
एंटी थायरोग्लोबुलिन एंटीबॉडीज?
बिल्कुल सर जी।
सॉरी?
यस सर।
अच्छा, As far as Graves' disease is concerned, anti-thyroglobulin antibodies are the importance nahi hai as a diagnostic tool, because we the antibodies against thyroglobulins and they are formed over there, but its most important, its diagnostic role is very much established as far as the malignancy and their follow-up is concerned. So especially in differentiated carcinoma of thyroid, if you follow it for response to treatment and for recurrence to occur, so this anti-thyroglobulin antibodies is done as a screening test for. So it's of little importance and little help in cases of primary thyrotoxicosis.
Thank you.
Okay, now coming to the treatment of such a disease. How do you treat such a patient?
According to the age.
We have a patient in front of us. We know about the parity of the patient, marital status of the patient, age of the patient, and clinical status of the patient. So why not to discuss this with particular patient?
She's an ideal candidate for anti-thyroid medications.
Anti-thyroid?
Medications.
Okay, like such a disease can be treated by 3 different ways. Number 1, by medications. Number 2, by radioactive iodine. Number 3, by surgery. And it's different clinical scenario, different clinical status of the patient, as well as the age and other parameters of the patient will make you decide which one is to be instituted first. So let's discuss about the medical management of thyrotoxicosis. How do you do that?
I would like to mention that that the treatment would be a multidisciplinary team action, and it would include an endocrinologist, an ophthalmologist, maybe a dermatologist, cardiologist, a nuclear medicine scientist, radiologist, surgeon, dietitian, and nutritionist, and sometimes a psychiatrist as well.
Okay, like anti-thyroid drugs are the ideal ones for those patients, if initial treatment of choice for such a patient, like, so initially every patient has to be started on anti-thyroid drug. And then starting on that, it depends upon the type of the treatment you are giving, age of the patient, response to the treatment, relapse of the disease after you discontinue it, and the other factors which make you decide. First of all, the patient has to be started on anti-thyroid drugs. So what are different types of anti-thyroid drugs? What are the mechanisms of actions, and what are the indications and contraindications? जी
कार्बिमेजोल, मेथिमेजोल, प्रोपाइलथायोरेसिल सर्जन.
तो थोड़ा सा लाउडली बोले, मेरी आवाज आ रही है क्लियरली आप लोगों को?
Yeah, I would like to stop. I think we should move on to the next link because the recording will stop.
Okay, recording will stop.
We need to click on the other link. I'll
Please.
start the other link and then we can start the same discussion again.
The second link.
Yeah, please click
Yes.
on that link after some time, like after 2 minutes.
After how much time?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay.
2 minutes tea break.
Thank you.
Oh,
Assalamualaikum, sir.